My name is Robert Thomas. I'm the director of design for Vines Architecture. I'm one of probably 5 architects that will be working on the new main library. With me today is Jeff Schroeder. He's our library planner and the project manager. And we're here today to talk a little bit, as Joel said, this is the point of departure for us in the designing of this, the new Durham main library. So these are visioning sessions. It's a stakeholder where we're engaging the community. So really today we'll give you a little bit about history and the background of the program that's been developed, an overview of the system as a whole and some of the strategic goals that have been outlined by Tammy and the leadership team and how those are informing the design of the project. Give you a little bit of an update on the current status, including the schedule. It's a county project that has some approvals. We're at the very beginning of it, so I'll give you a little bit of an overview on the scope and the schedule on the project and how we can work to really articulate and define and ultimately build the vision for this. And in the end, most importantly, I'll go through this fairly quickly, I'll try, but most importantly, we're gonna have an informal session at the end. You can see some of the boards around the room where we really wanna engage. Jeff and I will break up and just kind of hear from you all about some of the aspirations and visions for the project. And then we'll talk a little bit about the next steps, some of what we'll do with some of these sessions that we're holding with a number of constituents, and talk to you a little bit about how they'll inform our steps forward and how they'll manifest in the design of the project. And again, to emphasize right now, this is really the beginning. We're working to define the program at the scale of the room and the building, but ultimately what we're doing today is really about visioning rather than details. This is a vital kind of civic institution, so at this point we're interested in its position really within the community and what the library can do, not necessarily as a building, but an institution, what we can do to really make sure that this building serves as a catalyst for the revitalization of Durham. How can it better engage the context? So right now we're really in the big idea phase. What does this library need to be? We're not necessarily trying to understand yet what it needs to look like, but in general we're trying to define the essence of it and how to kind of capture the strategic vision and the ideals for the library, which will be the roadmap for us as designers to really interpret. The project leadership, this is the executive or the steering committee working on the library. We have Perry Mans and Brenda Hayes Bright. They're from Durham County. They're leading the project on the county end. Tammy, Sandra, and Joel are Tammy is the director of the library, Sandra the assistant, and Joel, who gave us that wonderful, excited introduction, is the main library manager. And then this is the core of the design team. There's more of us than are depicted here. Victor Vines is the managing principal of the practice. I'm his partner and the design director. And then, as I mentioned, Jeff Schroeder, and then Jolie Thomas is the project manager and designer. We're really part of, the architecture is one small part of a larger, really well integrated team. This is our consultant team, the architects at the top. There's a handful of others that aren't here today, but will be a part of the project from beginning to end. But we ultimately lead the team of all of these consultants, the mechanical and electrical and plumbing. They'll be charged with the upgrade of the systems and environmental and energy efficiency. A structural engineer, we're hoping to make some pretty dramatic changes to the physical structure of the building and potentially in addition, so we'll be working with a structural engineer. And then a very important component in these civic kind of urban projects, our landscape architect and civil engineer, Dan Jewell, who I think many of you probably know, a huge advocate for the redevelopment of downtown. And then the Sextant group, this is the team of IT, AV guys that were responsible for the design of the Hunt Library, all of the technology in the Hunt Library, so they're an integral part of the team. And we have a lighting designer and then of course a cost estimator. So while we're kind of in this grand visioning phase of the project, of course, it's a public project. We've got a fixed budget, so reconciling these aspirations with the realities of the budget is very important. Library projects are really the foundation of our practice. We believe in them as civic institutions. They're important to us as citizens, not just architects, so it's really the foundation of a lot of our work. We work in the public realm. We've done a lot of work in Durham. Jeff's done work on several of the regional libraries. We've just finished up an important project in Washington, D.C. This is a historic preservation project that we're honored to say has recently won a couple American Institute of Architects Historic Preservation Awards up here. We've done a lot of work as well in Washington, D.C., some award-winning projects, the Anacostia and the Tenley branch libraries in Washington, D.C. as well. And then public projects as well. Public, really visitor-based projects. These projects that participate in the civic realm are really important to us. We've done museums in Charlotte. Some of us, through previous association, have worked on the Durham Transit Center. The International Civil Rights Center in Greensboro we worked on. Currently, we're working on the North Carolina Civil War History Center in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is built on the foundations of the old arsenal ruins that were destroyed on Sherman's March to the Sea. So cultural and civic projects are really the foundation of our practice as architects. So a little bit about the background. There was a report that was done in 2009. This was the programming report that identified some basic concepts and defined through a different library leadership what was going to be in the library. Obviously, the economy, there were a number of things that kind of put that on hold, but as you can see, 6 years have passed. 2015, we were the firm that was hired to, in essence, interpret this plan and to design the building. But before we did that, we really think, and the county as well, that it's important to really look closely at some of the assumptions that were made in this 2009 plan. So the organization that this is the core of the project team. We talked about the county, the library, Vines Architecture. This is where we are today, where we're in the visioning sessions and really kind of sharing with you all. Hopefully some of you all have been a part of this project in 2009 in the visioning, but again, hearing from all of the community in the city and the civic organizations to make sure we understand some of these changes that have really happened in both the world of library science, development in Durham. So this is kind of the core organization of our process, and this input from all of these varied constituents and stakeholders are critically important. Again, the initial programming study, right now we're just in what we're calling the program verification phase. So public meetings, we're really not designing yet. We're hearing from you all. We're sharing with you analysis. But ultimately, we'll go from the program verification to the design and documentation. Clearly, there's a financing component to it, construction. That process takes a little bit over a year. These dates are very loose at this point. We still have to go through a county approval process and be authorized to proceed into design. But in very loose numbers, we're hoping to be open in 2019 or 2018, and I'll talk a little bit about the nature of that process. The vision and really the strategic plan that is outlined by Tammy in the library are really a critical point of departure for us in understanding the vision for the building architecturally. Before we even think about what the building needs to look like, we need to understand what it needs to be, and a lot of that comes from the library staff. So the vision that the library staff has articulated at its most fundamental level is this notion of creating a community of lifelong learners. So this is something that's quite important. We talk about with Tammy quite a bit the notion of the library really leading in literacy. That's literacy in the traditional sense. It's technological literacy. And then just as important is this notion of civic literacy as well. Again, realizing that we need these real places in these kind of this virtual landscape. We need real places to engage in this notion of civic literacy. So in courage, discovery, connect to the community. We'll talk a little bit about how some of that would inform, not just at a symbolic level, but at the architectural level. And then, as I mentioned, the library is really serious about this notion of leading and literacy on all those levels. So again, 2009 to 2015, 6 years. It doesn't seem like a long time, but there have been a tremendous amount of changes in that time. Clearly the new library leadership, Tammy is kind of the champion for kind of pushing the whole library system into the future. She's excited about the aspirations. She's really charged us with delivering a project that meets those aspirations. So a new leadership then is in place relative to that in 2009. Library trends and technology. I mean, six years is an enormous amount of time in the world of library science and technology. Jeff talks a little bit about this. Think about in 2009, I'm not even sure that the iPad existed. We spent a lot of time today talking about maker spaces and 3D printers. A handful of us, probably some of the Duke students had heard of those. I probably hadn't at that time. And then also changes in growth in Durham. There's an updated master plan on its way. We need to make sure we're understanding some of the latest changes in downtown Durham. So right now we're working to define what should be in the building, at the scale of the room, quantifying what needs to be in here to define the program, and really working to articulate the vision for the library. So that's what we're doing here today. Program verification is here, and we're working to define, again, the content of the program, the rooms, the programs. We'll define the actual programs, the spaces, the activities, providing the spaces in the building to accommodate those. That's one part of it. And again, establishing the vision. So before we even draw a line, start sketching, we've started some urban analysis. This part is really critical to our process. We have a very iterative and inclusive process. So this part is really about us listening, and I'll try to wrap up so we can hear from you. But before we even design anything, we absorb as much as we can about the community. So schematic design is when we start to look at what the building may look like, how it would be organized, how the program would distribute. There would be several different iterations. We have, again, a very inclusive process. This won't be the last time you hear from us. We come back, we present options. We're not the type of architects that run off to the studio and then come back and present to you what our vision is as architects for the new library. This is us interpreting really, it's a public institution. It's really not a building for Vines Architecture, it's a building for Durham. So our schematic design process is very iterative. Design development is when we start to think about what it would actually look like, materials, the plan is set, and then construction documents is when we start to define the instructions for how to build the building. So this is about a year, and then the construction process is a little bit over a year. So here we are right here in just the listening and analyzing component. It's a really important feedback that's really integrated into our process, and really it's important in working in the public realm is that it is inclusive. It's not, we don't endorse the model of kind of the hero model of an architect, again, kind of coming to a community. We've worked on a number of libraries, really all over the country. One thing we know is they're all a little bit different, and they're really defined by the people and the citizens. So we have a very rigorous, again, iterative process. And in the end, it's really, at this point and in the concept design, it's about defining these collectively held ideals that as designers we interpret. Whether it's about connectivity or transparency or whatever it may be, we articulate the principles together, and then our charge as the designer or the architect is not to impose anything but interpret these collectively defined ideals. And we're working at the scale of the room, what's in the building, and then also at the same time, and it's a back and forth, really the scale of the city. It's a civic institution again. It has enormous power to impact the urban fabric beyond the footprint of the building. So as we're looking at the rooms from the inside out, we're also thinking about it from the outside in, that we're understanding some of the some of the things that are happening in Durham and the nature of the context and the site. So this back and forth is a very important part of what we're doing right now in our analysis. And of course, working within the Durham Master Plan, we just had a session with some of the county and city leaders and urban planners. So we're working with a Durham open space plan to understand some of the principles that are guiding that, how it might inform the library. And then, of course, the Unified Development Ordinance will inform the architecture of the building. So in all of this, these aren't concepts yet, but there have been several. We've only been working on this and absorbing information for, we've had about maybe 5 or 6 different sessions, and there have been some, not concepts, but themes that are starting to emerge that will inform the way we start to think about the building. Safe, secure, and welcoming. I hope it goes without saying, but it is a very unique challenge, in particular with urban libraries and this site in particular. You know, how can we make sure that it is really safe and secure and welcoming, and but also be at service to really the whole population of Durham. The notion that I mentioned before about encouraging discovery and lifelong learning, that notion of learners at all ages. It's about literacy, again, technological literacy, civic literacy, and then also connectivity, you know, that in a very literal way and a symbolic way as well. And like, how can we really use the library to think about opportunities to engage the community symbolically, physically, and then we talk about connectivity a lot within the building as well. For those of you that are familiar with the building, you know that there are some challenges about the connectivity within the 3 floors. So this is an important theme that starts to inform the way we think about the architecture. And along that notion with engaging kind of the community and literally kind of outreach more, we see a tremendous opportunity for usable outdoor areas, programmable areas. What can we do to take this very insular building that's somewhat inward looking? The site is very much about residual spaces and accommodating parking. There's green space, but it's not in some ways civic-minded green space, programmable green space. So are there opportunities along with that notion of security and safety? How can we better address some of our outdoor areas? And then technologically advanced, and along with that adaptable, as we outlined in the 2009 to 2015, that rapid rate of change is not gonna, if anything, it's gonna accelerate. So the only thing we do know is that in 10 years we won't know what programs we'll need to accommodate. So technology and adaptability in the design and the systems are enormously important. This is something that Tammy spends a lot of time talking about as a real driver for us as architects, but making sure we're building a library for the future. It doesn't necessarily mean in how it's gonna look, but the notion of embracing change is important. And then sustainability, that's a very important ethic of our practice. It is for the county. Just as a matter of course, LEED certification is something enormously important. And then in the end, it's a library for Durham. Like we work all over in all of these different branches. What we've realized is that the most successful, as universal as information is becoming, and as access to information is so readily accessible and somewhat universal, what really makes libraries unique are the communities that define them. So this is something we spend an awful lot of time in, understanding these universal ideas about information exchange, but also trying to find the opportunities to really articulate what it is that makes this library system unique. Some of you may not know, but the very first public library in the state of North Carolina was actually in Durham. The first public librarian was publicly funded librarian, was a Durham librarian. So what can we do to tell the story of Durham, the cultural history of Durham? What can we do as architects? We do a lot of museum work to help, whether it's the building or the interior of the architecture, tell that story. The programs here are quite unique. And then we talked a little bit about this, but it has a very unique opportunity as an urban library, and this is where we talk about the civic engagement, to engage the downtown businesses and government. The demographic of downtown is changing quite a bit. There are new residents, new businesses, how we need to be aware of that. The Cleveland Holloway neighborhood, these established single-family neighborhoods to the north that have been there forever, is seeing a resurgence and redevelopment, a really critical part of the connectivity to the site. And then also when you think about the adjacency, this real vital adjacency to these county and social services, the county outreach, the urban ministries, that real social core of the library that is really critical as a civic institution. What can we do to better serve all of these populations? Public libraries really genuinely are about serving all. It's one of the last vestiges of kind of truly democratic space. You know, it's a space for all. I mean, even in some ways, the internet is somewhat commercialized in a way. So just the notion of the site and the location as being really uniquely positioned to best kind of carry out the mission of a public library. Let's skip that. Some of the urban design issues that were articulated in the 2009 plan. This is Roxborough Street here, Liberty Street. In 2009, they pointed out this notion of connectivity across the loop. Everyone knows about the nature of the loop, and I feel like we've been talking about the loop in Durham for maybe 20 years, at least since I've been here. So connectivity back to the fabric of the city. And then also image and visibility. You know, what is there's an opportunity to really articulate the presence of the building on this corner. So there's something very important about Liberty and Roxborough Street. And then the entry, you know, where is the front door? It seems like a simple question, but it has a number of challenges relative to the organization of the library, wayfinding. But as many of you know that use the library, I've used this same analogy a number of times. I think it still applies. It's that suburban dilemma of this kind of symbolic front porch that no one really uses, a couple use, and most people are kind of coming in through the back door or the garage. It wasn't really ever intended as a main entry. But with that, we do know that parking still will be critically important. So what can we do to reconcile not only the two entries, but the two entries coming in on two different levels is a key driver. So with all of that starts to inform, this is in no way a design concept yet, but it talks about some of these urban design influences or site drivers that start to inform the building, how we might start to organize it. Some of these principles, again, I mentioned before, inside out, outside in. So keeping it in that broader civic context, that neighborhood connectivity. Is there an opportunity to think about how people get to the library from that neighborhood? Is there a way that we're envisioning there being some redevelopment of the site as well? We talked about some of those outdoor program spaces. Is there something we can do to better facilitate that connectivity to the neighborhood? Thinking about the nature of the street edges, not as they exist now, but the vision for them in the future. This part of Durham, it developed at a time when civic buildings were really thought of. There were a little bit more of an island. You know, there was a little bit more preference placed on the building as an object as opposed to the building as something that defines edges and streets. So thinking about the potential for the Liberty Street corridor, could it become a little bit more dense, starting to think about opportunities to define the streetscape? Is there a way that the building can better, again, engage the fabric of the city? And then obviously the connectivity back to downtown proper and how we can better facilitate that. So again, these are some of the urban drivers that start to inform, before we even start design, how we might start to think about how the building should react to some of these spaces. So these are, I mean, that was a lot of information, I know, but I'm going to ask Jeff. We talked a lot about the outside-in forces. Jeff's going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing in libraries and some of the drivers that will shape the interior of the building. And what's important to acknowledge is that these things happen at the same time. Again, we're working at the urban and civic scale, and then we're working at the scale of the room and making sure that we kind of articulate a vision that those kind of knit together.
So one of the things in thinking about the library and kind of what the new facility is going to be is to acknowledge that collections and services are changing, that the book is still very, very much a critical part of it. It's not going away anytime soon, but that it's being joined by things such as DVDs, CDs, electronic media that are supplementing that collection. And then the other thing that's a radical change from kind of the library of 20, 25 years ago are the programs that are offered, that it's not just story time for children anymore, that there's things that happen like knitting classes or, Lego classes or bicycle repair or gaming, but you really have these broad and diverse programs that are offered. So that really makes an exciting library. You have vibrant spaces, you have open spaces, places for these kind of exciting and active events to happen. But then you also need to balance that with sort of the need for the quiet space, the place where somebody can escape to kind of study, to be focused, to be by themselves. So one of the other issues that is really a key part of that is just the whole notion of transparency and light. That while you have these different things happening, the idea that natural light's coming into the building, the current facility is very much an insular place. There's windows, but they're thin, they're tall, they don't really provide views or connection to the city. So that's one of the things that we'll look at going forward. Along with that is the notion of visibility and clarity. Right now with the two front doors and the stair in the middle, you kind of come in, you don't fully know where to go. It's not very efficient in terms of space usage. It's not intuitive in terms of wayfinding. So we want to really look at how can we open up the building to get better flow from both public standpoint, but also from a staffing standpoint. Sort of in contrast to that, we still know that small spaces need to exist. You have about a 65,000 square foot building with about 25,000 square feet. So the last thing we want is kind of one big vast space, because that doesn't really provide the optimal places. So we really want to look at balancing the big picture of the building with sort of the small scale rooms and places that people feel comfortable in. As Bob mentioned earlier, technology is a huge component of it. It's understanding the computers are key, but then also the new technology, the maker spaces, the large scale tablets, what's going to happen in the future, and then the way that people use technology. I mean, here's a very old technology being used in a very new way, and it allows for the library to be connected, that people can be in the library, they can share, people can find out what's going on through social media, they can share it with friends, but then also even things as video conferencing, collaborative spaces, both with technology and in sort of the old school marker board type environments are still very, very important. We talked about briefly, but the programs, making sure that we have places for them to happen. It yields new program spaces. Things that we're seeing now are music studios, video production labs, again, writable walls, gaming, cafes. It's very, very different than when this building was built in the early 80s. And then the most critical part of it, we feel, is the ability to be flexible and have many things that can happen in spaces. The last thing we want is a room that's like this that gets used a couple times a week. We want to find ways that everything in the library can have maximum use, that it can flex, that this can be a meeting room when you have 300 people in here, but it can also be opened up so it can be program spaces when there's nothing going on. So really every inch of the library can get the maximum efficiency out of it. And in the end, libraries need to serve everyone. You've got multiple styles. You have young, you have old. You have people that want a very quiet library, people that want an active library. And so how can it be designed in such a way to accommodate as much of that as can possibly happen? So looking at how it informs this facility, there's a couple key items that we've talked about and sort of have a general consensus on. One is the goal of having the adult collection on one floor. Right now it's stacked on the second and the third floor. It's difficult for staffing, it's difficult for wayfinding, so looking for ways to kind of consolidate that into one level. As Bob mentioned, the entry is a huge issue. It's not very It's not easy to kind of find your way. You have 2 different staffing points. It's a security challenge. It takes up a lot of space, so looking at how that can be resolved. And then the idea of visibility and security, getting the stair out of the building. Ideally, we'd like to have an open space so when you come in, you aren't necessarily looking for signage or having to ask someone where to go, that you can easily see, the teen collection is here, the children's is here, the adult is there. So it's very intuitive, it's very open. It's easier for staff to work, it's easier for the public to use, so there's a lot of advantages with that. In terms of the program spaces, the computers are a key part of it. We know that there's going to be more than what's here now. We know that there's going to be additional technology. We also know that there's a need for a larger meeting room. I think this meeting room currently seats about 130, so the library has several programs that they actually have to take off site, so there is a need for a larger facility that can accommodate those programs here. And then the other item that's very much lacking right now is the study and conference and meeting spaces. There's this space, there's a handful of study rooms, but we really see a series of study rooms for everything from a 1 or 2 person space to a 10 to 12 to 15 person space. So it can really engage all different needs in the community and all different types of styles. In addition, we've looked at new program spaces, library cafes, maker spaces. There's been talk about literacy centers and business incubators, but we really want to hear from you kind of what your thoughts are in terms of what the need is and what's going to help the library to best serve you. And then briefly about the collection, in terms of the volumes, we think it's going to be similar to what it is now, but that there might be a slight reorganization in terms of percentages. Looking at what circulates and what's heavily used, the children's has incredibly high usage. The teen has a high usage, and the adult is high, but not at the level of the other 2. So we see that the children's collection may adjust up a little bit, the teens up a little bit, and maybe the adult has a slight decrease. And then in terms of the existing building, right now, as I mentioned, it's about 1.5 floors of it are occupied by the adult collection. The children's is fairly small. There's a heavy public area just from the dual entries, the circulation, and a lot of space associated with that. And so going forward, this is from a percentage standpoint, we think the percentage of the building that the adult occupies is going to decrease a little bit and give space to meeting and program spaces, the study rooms, the conference rooms, and then also trying to increase the size of the North Carolina room slightly, the teen area quite a bit, the children's area quite a bit, and thinking that the core, which is sort of the circulation service areas, would be about the same as well as the staff area. And so what we know right now is that the building is going to be bigger. We don't know how much bigger. The original program report in 2009 had about a 4,000 square foot addition, but we're working to define that right now and see if that's valid or if it's more. But what we know is there's great spaces that need to happen that aren't in here now. So as we continue to work with the library leadership to define what those are and what makes the most sense based on needs, that number that's a question mark now will become a little bit clearer. But again, we know that there's going to be some kind of addition to the building. So now it's your turn.
Can we just add this down here? We're putting it here.
Well, they're writing it in space for friends, but we need to, like, fire session for book sales. Yeah.
There's some interesting things that are out there and that we actually have a few questions about. So maybe before we go into questions, we'll ask you guys a question first. Which is that looking at the boards, especially the dots in the back, there were a lot of not desired red dots under the maker spaces. So I was curious to kind of hear your thoughts and just if it was something that either we didn't do a good job explaining or is there something else that's out there that we're not aware of. But that seems to be one that people don't like. Thoughts? Anyone?
So what would you envision a maker space to be that would be that we would want to go to, that we would want to use?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't use a maker space now, so I don't have a concept for ever using one?
Yeah. Makerspaces are kind of a new trend in libraries in that it's a way to bring it's kind of a very, very broad field. I mean, a makerspace, they've defined anything from like a kitchen where you might learn how to cook or do cooking classes, to technology such as 3D printing, to wood shops, sort of anything in between. I mean, it's ways that people can come in and kind of engage technology and engage kind of learning I don't want to say a skill, but sort of learning what's out there and learning the newest things that are coming out and kind of how to use it. So the library currently has a small makerspace down here, but it's only open, Joel, correct me if I'm wrong, it's open Saturdays?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's open on Saturdays, and you have the chance to use our 3D printer, which is, you design whatever it is that you want to design and then print it off using the 3D printer. So anybody would like, come by and check it out on Saturdays. I want to say it's from 9:30 to 3, something. I can check on that.
Y'all referenced the 2009 planning process a couple times.
Yes.
I'm just kind of curious, are there any takeaways that y'all are taking from that process, or are you really starting completely fresh?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we're the 2009 programming document that was done is actually very, very thorough, and there's a lot of really good information in there. A lot of the site strategies, in terms of connectivity to the city, visibility, are still very, very valid. A lot of the programming components that are in there are still valid. I think the biggest change that we see is really in the role of technology, making sure that that's there, and then the programs have increased significantly since then. So we're bumping up those spaces, the meeting spaces, the program spaces significantly, and then trying to balance the collection based on what was in there. The numbers that we have are the same thing that was in that program document for 2009. We actually may be slightly higher than that, but it's understanding. One of the things that we want to do is really understand how the collection is housed, and that if you go through the library now, especially on the second floor, you'll see sort of stacks that might have, maybe you're a quarter full and largely empty. So we really want to figure out how to balance the number of stacks that are in the building with the collection, allowing room for it to grow, but trying to not have vast empty shelves in the library, so that when you come in here, it doesn't feel like, the library doesn't have anything. We want people to come in and feel like they've got a huge collection, and there's a lot of stuff here for me to see. And so it's balancing the square footage that we need for that. And so those are kind of some of the things that we're taking from there. I think the other thing that we looked at was the current information on the usage of like the children's and the teens and the adult area, and the amount of the collection from when it was done in 2009 usage versus where it is now has significantly increased. It's not really a good metric, but if you kind of look at the number of volumes from the number of visitors for the children's versus the number of volumes, it's something like twice as much circulation as like what the adult has. So those are some of the things that we're looking at to adjust that. But I think the core of that program is still very, very valid and very solid.
In terms of, I think you said this, so I apologize.
I apologize if you already said this, but in terms of connectivity for the three areas like Liberty Hallway and Roxborough, what are some ideas or thoughts on how that might be achieved that would be doable given the restraints that might be there with the loop?
Yeah, I could speak to that. And we're in the midst of a lot of sessions with a lot of the downtown planners as well. Some of the key issues is just ways that we can start to facilitate that is in the building's connection to the street, and then the street's connection to the rest of the fabric. So we've had conversations with planners about the one-way traffic, the two-way traffic, and how can there's a developer's proposal across the street to straighten out Liberty. The city is working now to switch the traffic to two ways. We're exploring ideas about and this is a little bit outside the scope of our project, but traffic calming on Roxborough, independent of what may or may not happen with the loop. I mean, there clearly is a lot of momentum for it. Something needs to change. It's a tremendous investment, though, in cost in doing it. So independent of whether the loop is kind of rerouted or not, there's a lot of things that we could do to calm the traffic. It's in the streetscape, defining edges in the landscape. It's about introducing lanes of parking to calm traffic. So I think there's a lot of different, there's an ultimate vision for this kind of grand notion of kind of restoring the grid and introducing kind of more connectivity, but at a small scale, just a better, real basic attention to placemaking and understanding the streetscape and the scale of the street. How can we translate this, to be honest, a city, this part of the city that was planned really, that predicated the use of the car, and like how can we kind of shift it to bike lanes and more pedestrian base. So I think there's a whole gamut of things that we can do, and we're really, some of what we're doing now is really engaging city and county leadership to make sure that we understand what we can do as the library project to start to really be the catalyst for some of this change. I mean, we've seen a lot of these plans on paper. You know, how can the library, and there is a lot of county and city projects going on, but what can we do with the library to really become the catalyst for all of these edges around it that can start to stretch into Cleveland Holloway and west to downtown. So I know it's a loose answer, but we're really serious about the project being a catalyst to start introducing more pedestrian connectivity into all those nodes.
I know maybe it was back in the 2009 planning stage when there was at least some discussion of public-private partnerships for development of the real estate here, you know, that would add income and opportunity. Is that off the table completely? And just sort of as an asterisk to that, I mean, Brooklyn library system right now is involved in a lot of those partnerships, you know, building skyrises above libraries.
Yeah. I mean, Perry, can you speak to that? I know we've, I mean, it's a...
Basically, what we're doing right now is we have to track down the path as if this is a whole project. You know, the county is always, I guess, being pursued by private developers for other opportunities around the city, around the county as well. And there are a lot of things that are going on that I really can't talk about. But I urge everyone to kind of do some internet searches and just type in develop downtown Durham development. And you'll see all types of interesting things that are coming about. And it's really a great time right now. But for the purpose of this project, we have to move forward.
What is your role, sir?
I'm senior project manager for county engineer.
But whatever is done now, will that make it impossible then to develop?
No, not at all.
So it'll be made so that it could still remain a developable site.
Absolutely. Again, you know, I think one of the slides that you guys showed earlier talked about actually what could possibly happen with the parking lot across the street. And I know there's the county, I guess, upper management is real visionaries in terms of what they look at. You know, one of the issues that we face every day is parking in downtown Durham. It's really an issue for staff, but it's also critical to the development or future development of this end of town. So when we look at possibly doing future decks or what have you, we always look at things like retail wraps on the lower level. And like I said, there are a lot of things that are going on right now that I'm really not at liberty to talk about. But we are fully aware of future development and what this site particularly could do for the fabric of downtown Durham.
I wanted to ask just a follow-up. You know, one of the things I saw was, you know, the idea for a cafe or maybe a coffee shop. And, you know, would that be, you know, a possible, you know, private partnership where someone could come in? I'm thinking like the Museum of Life and Science has got a facility where there's food, where they might be paying a fee to the county, and then, you know, the folks can have something to eat. Or are you really, you know, exclusively county venture, not considering any kind of private partnership?
I'll let Tammy talk about that.
Right now, most of the discussions have really been around it being the county looking at what those cafe possibilities would be. We also have a friends group. That is something that could be a possibility of how we could have a cafe. So we just don't have decisions yet with that, so we're exploring options, but most of them have been specific to the county, or seeing what direction the Friends group would want to go with that.
Anybody else?
You mentioned the Friends group, so is there private fundraising going on also for any of this, or is it all just county expenditures right now?
We don't have any fundraising going on currently for this project. The Library Foundation just completed a $1 million fundraising campaign, and there are components in that that will be used for this project, but it's specific to collections, adding sorting machines, and our outreach services.
I notice that most people don't think service points are important. You have any comments about that?
I think from the design team's perspective, service points are really critical. Making sure that the staff is in the right place, that they're designed in such a way that they're accessible, that they're safe for the staff working here. So I think, we feel strongly that they're a very, very critical part of the building, having them in the right place. I guess if anybody commented that they don't think it's critical, we'd be curious to hear those thoughts as well.
I'm curious, part of me wonders when I see something like that, kind of a group thing going on with some of that, I'd always be curious if you did this as a handout and ask folks to kind of rate if you get different types of feedback.
Yeah, we thought.
Yeah, I would just say that given so many choices and only having 4 colors, I think for some people the red meant my 4th choice maybe, and I think I threw my red dots away because I didn't, and maybe you need to explain that better. Because you're interpreting the way you said was we do not think this is important, whereas I think other folks might say service points. Right now in the library, service points are not a problem. I think they're okay. They're very visible. They work. They've got the electronic checkouts. So we don't see it as a problem that really needs major improvement. But obviously we think it's important.
Yeah, it's critical part.
If I can chime in here, as the manager here trying to make sure those service points are staffed, you can rest assured that that's on the forefront of our discussions, because it has been a challenge given the layout of this facility to make sure that we have warm bodies at all those service points. So Joyce, we're definitely on top of that. We're going to try and make sure that we have logical service points whenever the new facility opens.
I actually work for a nonprofit agency across the street, the Shelter and Services for Homeless Families. On Liberty Street, there's also the Urban Ministries shelter that works primarily with individuals seeking services. I think a lot of folks that use the library know that it's really kind of a day center for a lot of our homeless neighbors, and that's very important in the summer when it's very hot, and in the winter when it's very cold. I think because Durham continues to really grow by leaps and bounds, I have to question whether kind of the downtown business community knows what the impact of the renovation and the closure is going to be. I really think there's going to need to be kind of some messaging and some communication, because I'm in the business of basic needs, and these are folks that will not have any place to go during the day, no place to use the bathroom, and so there could be kind of some bad PR that comes out of that. And I think that'll have to be managed as we get closer to the date when y'all are shutting down.
And one thing that I'll say is that we're
in the planning stages of how we will provide services to the community while we're closed. And that's a very important part of that. And some of it will be increasing our outreach efforts going to the communities. That doesn't address all the needs that you have. So you've brought up an interesting point, because it really could bring up some bad PR about that and how we need to work with the businesses downtown. So it's not forgotten, and thank you for adding that extra point that I had not thought of yet.
Okay. Then briefly, just a little bit of an overview of what the next steps are, is that the information that we've gotten from you today, we will work to compile and discuss it with the leadership team from the library to just kind of get a sense of what some of the recurring themes are and the issues are. We also want to make sure we find a way to make it available to you guys, so you can just see what's come out of this session as well as some of the other sessions as well. And then as the project continues, we want to have more of these sessions so that you guys are kept aware of what the progress is on the project, what's happening as the design develops, so that we can get your input. You know, we really do pride ourselves on a process that's very inclusive and that we hear your thoughts. We think about them and kind of engage them into the process going forward. So there will be more of these. And then one last thing before I forget is that if you have the surveys, please remember to put them in the envelopes at the back. Even if you've never been here before, however you got here today, it's great to have that information as well. It just really helps us think about kind of how people are coming here, why they're coming, and how they're using it. And if you're interested in the project, the library has established some websites and email address devoted to it. The website will have information probably on this presentation as well as some of the others and some facts about the library. And then the email, if you have any specific questions, you can email them and they'll get responses to you. But keep those kind of available and just continue to follow the process. We think it's going to be something very, very special for Durham, very, very special for the city, very special for the neighborhoods, and just the library community in general as well. So thank you for being here. We appreciate all of your input, and we'll be around a little bit if you have any other questions that you want to speak to us. Thank you again for coming.